think about something like this, that proposal is not even on the table right now. No one's talking about that proposal. So you think, how do you get a proposal like this? How do you get traction for it? How do you get it into the mainstream? And we can all learn something from the Elizabeth Dole presidential campaign. You all remember when Elizabeth Dole ran for president, Bob Dole's wife? Now, she's a lovely woman. I have nothing against her as a human being. I'm sure she's a fine, generous person. But I am telling you that there is no one who at the time, I don't know how many years ago this was, but did she run in '96, I think? There was not a soul on earth who was saying, I sure wish Elizabeth Dole, the transportation secretary, would run for president, because there's someone I could get behind. No one was, there was no grassroots movement to draft Elizabeth Dole. I mean, there were already enough non-entities already declared you could choose from. Why draft this one? And it turns out that basically the way it happened was prominent people got on TV and started mentioning her name. You know who I think would make a good presidential candidate? Elizabeth Dole. And then just after a little sort of the power of suggestion, people just started saying, you know, good one, Elizabeth Dole. And it actually kind of reminds me even of the Dan Quayle, Lloyd Bentsen presidential debate. You know that, and I don't know. No, it was good. No, not Benson. It was the Gore and Quayle debate in '92. Now I watched that. That was back when I was still, very much interested. I actually thought there was a big difference between all these people. And I watched that debate, and I remember thinking, you know what? Quayle actually did a pretty good job in this debate. Like, I was surprised. He actually did a pretty good job. And the polls basically had it about even with a slight edge to Quayle. But then, after 3 solid days of the media saying Quayle was pummeled, 2/3 of America said Quayle was pummeled. Nothing had changed in the interim. So in other words, if you just keep saying it, just keep ramming it into the public consciousness, you can take something from nothing and run with it. Okay, yes?
As an example of that point you're making, how many times have people in this room heard the phrase, rising star of the Republican Party, Paul Ryan? The power of suggestion. And if you take a look at his record, voted for the Bankster bailout, voted for the GM Chrysler bailout, voted for No Child Left Behind, and 15 or 20 other unconstitutional bits of legislation. And yet both the left and the right wing say that he's the rising star.
Yeah, I know it.
But that wasn't my point. My point is this. I think there's at least two other methods of nullification that ought to be considered. I went to a Sheriff Mack presentation here earlier on, and that's closely related to what some of you in this room might know as the Oath Keepers thing, where law enforcement officers can say, unconstitutional, I'm not going to take your guns away, because the federal government cannot do that. It says the Second Amendment. And Sheriff Mack's thing is the sheriff especially is the last line of protection of the public against tyranny. And I think that would tie it together with your nullification. And of course the third leg to stand on, I believe, is jury nullification. And if you don't know this, you need to know it. It is a historical precedent that you, if you're on a jury, have the right to judge both the fact and the law, regardless of what lies the judge in the case tells you. And I think if this was common knowledge, if every sheriff in the country, or even a third or 10% of them, followed Sheriff Mack's dictates, and if there was one juror on every jury who understood jury nullification, we could turn back the tide of tyranny just like that.
Yeah, I like that. I feel like I myself have not done enough on the jury nullification thing. It becomes more important and significant the more I think about it. One of the 2 titles I still have remaining over here, my 33 Questions book, one of the questions is, did the Founding Fathers favor jury nullification? And they did. I mean, by and large, the consensus of them was that this is how the people can actually influence the laws by which they are governed. Because for all your civics textbooks platitudes to the contrary, we really don't have that much influence over legislators most of the time. But when you're sitting there on a jury, you can have all the influence in the world. So that's very important, and there's only a brief reference to it in the nullification book, and it should be great. Yeah, I know, but I feel like they've already done, there are already good books on jury nullification. We just need to get them. We need to get them in people's hands. But yeah, 100% I agree completely. Yes.
A little bit more on your talk on South Carolina nullification. I had read a few years ago the Watkins book, Reclaiming the American Revolution. when it came to South Carolina, my goodness, they were very structured. They had very precise ideas on how this should happen.
Yeah.
It almost seems like that would kill the baby in the bathwater, so to speak, without letting it flourish in different ways. So what are your thoughts about structured, very precise ideas of nullifying versus letting people be creative?
Yeah, because I think you're referring to the fact that South Carolina actually held a convention. I mean, they actually went to nullify. The idea of the founding generation was that the convention that's called by the people, the popular convention, is the highest expression of the people's sovereign voice. Much higher than just a legislative statement, because one legislative statement could be contradicted by another one the next day. But we don't have a permanent convention sitting. So when the people call their convention, that is the vehicle through which they express their sovereign voice. So it was thought that therefore, because in nullifying something, we are engaged in something that is, perhaps as solemn as ratifying the Constitution itself. We should do this through the mechanism of a convention as well. But I mean, I think that, and that's fine. I have no objection to that if that's what they want to do. But you're right. I think that could be a slow and cumbersome process. And I don't see that we're necessarily wedded to that. And I don't see evidence that Jefferson himself thought that you had to call a convention or any such thing. I think that's what South Carolina wanted to do. But I don't think we would be committed to that. I think that itself would be an aspect of the sovereignty of the peoples of the states. Decide the vehicle through which they're going to nullify something. I think that would be up to them. Okay, well, let me ask this gentleman at the back first.
Dr. Woods, in your, I apologize ahead of time how long this is going to be, but in your book you cite in the later chapters a number of examples, the Virginia Resolution, Madison's report, 1800, that sort of thing, how these have been used, and examples in the past where nullification has been employed. But since the late 1930s, where there's been kind of a shift in how law is taught and how it's adjudicated from referring to founding charters to case precedent, there seems to be, since the 1930s, a paucity of examples of it. You do cite the Real ID Act of 2005, and I'm thinking also like the Brown versus Board of Education response by the southern states, particularly Florida. If we try to use this type of action now, say in response to Obamacare, and it's taken to court, what do we have other than Real ID that in this post-1937 era that we can cite as effective nullification? How do we approach that from a legal standpoint and support our argument?
Yeah, I think in this case, I don't think we do. I don't think we have much to cite. So I think what it's going to boil down to is a matter of it's just the way Michael Bolden puts it and other people put it. In the 21st century, nullification has become something somewhat different. It's become a kind of a civil disobedience, with the twist that it's a civil disobedience ratified by the state government. The state government, in effect, saying that there is a critical mass of people in this state that are willing to, resist doing thus and so it's not going to be done here, and we're going to protect them from the consequences of that. So it's just like, it would be like asking, what legal precedent is there for resisting segregation laws? Well, I mean, there really isn't. I mean, or what legal precedent could the American colonists cite for breaking with the British Empire? Now, I mean, well, that turned to violence, of course, but maybe it didn't have to. The point is that if you have a people who simply do not accept the legitimacy of what the government is doing, then they can make a lot of statements, but they won't be enforceable. So the minor example, seems like a minor example, but I think it's significant. The California medical marijuana thing is significant because the Supreme Court says, no, you cannot make this exception to the drug laws, and then later the Ninth Circuit reaffirmed this, and then the Justice Department was against them, and yet then they kept on doing it. So I don't think if we're going to restore anything that resembles the original republic, it's not going to be done through legal briefs and court decisions. It's going to be done by the people, through the force of their will, reestablishing some kind of modus vivendi between the federal government and the states, just through expressing their determination to see it through. I think I don't see